"You look tired like my husband before he died," young widow told the scarred stranger in the darkest corner of the bar. The snow had started again just before 2 in the morning. Chicago in December wrapped itself in bitter cold and silence, the kind that made even the streetlights seem lonely. A thin white layer coated the sidewalks, untouched, as if the city itself had stopped breathing. Midnight Ember sat on the corner of a forgotten street, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. Blues drifted from the old speakers, heavy and slow, matching the weight of the late hour. It stayed open for those who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Elena Vasquez moved between tables with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, loose strands falling across her pale face. Her uniform clung to her thin frame, slightly too tight, the way the manager preferred. There were deep shadows under her eyes, the kind that sleep alone could not fix. Her hands were cracked and raw from bleach and winter air, nails bitten short. Still, she carried herself with a broken kind of strength, someone used to surviving on far less than she deserved. In the darkest corner, in the same seat he occupied every night after midnight, sat Dominic Cross. His black coat hung over the chair, his dark turtleneck tight against broad shoulders. A faint scar ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, catching the dim light like a secret. His gray eyes, cold as steel, watched nothing and everything at once. A single glass of whiskey sat untouched before him, the ice long melted. Elena noticed him. She always did. There was something about the way he sat, still as stone, that reminded her of a man waiting to either kill or die. She approached to clear the empty glasses nearby, pausing briefly as she took in the hard line of his jaw, the distant look in his eyes. She set down her tray, hesitating. "You look tired like my husband before he died," she said quietly, almost to herself, "like you are waiting for something that will never come." Dominic turned slowly. His gray gaze met her brown one, surprised but not offended. For a moment, neither spoke. The bar noise faded around them. "I am sorry," Elena said quickly, color rising in her pale cheeks. "I should not have said that. I do not know why I did." Dominic lifted a hand, the silver ring on his finger catching the light, a lion head engraved deep into the metal. "That is not the worst thing someone has ever said to me," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. A breath of tired laughter slipped from her lips, unintentional. He almost smiled. Almost. She did not walk away. He did not reach for his coat. They stayed where they were, separated only by the table and something neither could name. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the bar hummed with smoke and old music, amber and shadow bleeding together. The blues shifted into something softer, sadder. Elena glanced at him again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He used to sit like that, my husband, like he was watching something only he could see." Dominic looked down at his whiskey. "Did he find it?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No. He died in a robbery 3 years ago, still waiting for life to get better, still believing it would." Dominic's eyes flickered, just briefly. Something passed between them, not pity, not sympathy, but recognition. The kind shared by people who had both lost more than they could carry. Another silence followed, less awkward now, more honest. The empty glasses still sat on her tray. Dominic finally looked up, asking softly, his voice stripped of its usual coldness, "What about you? Are you still waiting?" Elena met his eyes. For a long moment, she did not answer. Then she spoke, her voice flat, matter of fact, the way people speak when they have accepted truths too heavy to fight. "I stopped waiting the night I almost sold myself to pay for my daughter's heart surgery. Now I just keep moving. I work 4 jobs. I barely sleep 3 hours a night. I do not hope anymore. I just survive until tomorrow." Dominic stared at her, something shifting behind his steel-gray eyes. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Elena picked up her tray and moved to another table, stealing one glance back at him. When she returned to the counter, she noticed something she had never seen in all the nights he had come here. The whiskey glass was empty. And outside, the snow kept falling, covering Chicago like a burial shroud, soft and final and endless. If this story satisfies you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a tale that touches the heart. Morning came far too early. The alarm went off at 5 o'clock in the morning, a weak, tinny sound from a cracked screen phone lying on the floor, and Elena Vasquez opened her eyes at once, her body more accustomed to this rhythm than her mind ever could be. She sat up in the darkness of the windowless basement, where a single dim yellow bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a light so feeble it was almost useless. The room barely 18 square meters wide, its walls peeling and blotched with black mold stains. The stench of old plumbing and dead rats lingering in the air without ever fully fading. In the corner, a thin mattress lay directly on the cold concrete floor, where Mia was curled up beneath a worn and frayed blanket. Her breathing wheezing and labored as though every breath were a battle. Elena sat still for a moment, watching the small chest rise and fall unevenly, her heart tightening as if crushed in an invisible fist. 4 years old. Her child was only 4 years old, and already carrying a broken heart inside her tiny body. Elena bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to Mia's forehead, her lips touching the warm skin. Then she rose without a sound, reached for the wrinkled cleaning uniform draped over a plastic chair with a broken leg and slipped into it in silence. Hot water had not run for 2 weeks, so she washed her face with icy water from the rusted tap, the cold cutting into her skin like a blade. She tied her hair back into a ponytail without a mirror because she no longer needed one, then pulled on her thin jacket, the only one she owned, its inner lining torn and no longer capable of holding warmth. Before leaving, she placed on the table the portion of bread she had sliced the night before and a small carton of milk. Breakfast for Mia when she woke. Mrs. Thompson from the next room would come over to watch her. An 80-year-old woman living alone who loved Mia like her own grandchild and never asked for a single dollar, the only true kindness Elena had ever received in this life. She stepped outside into the pitch-dark basement stairwell, where the smell of urine and garbage burned her nose. She moved quickly without looking to either side, unwilling to see the addicts huddled in corners or the rats darting across her feet. Outside, Chicago was still swallowed by darkness. Last night's snow lay thick on the sidewalks, and the -12-degree cold tore through her thin clothing, as if she were wearing nothing at all. Elena walked 20 minutes to the office building where she worked her first job, entered through the back door meant for people like her, those who were not allowed to exist while daylight remained. She pulled her supply cart and began cleaning from the first floor, mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, taking out trash, wiping desks. 4 floors alone in 3.5 hours. The cleaning chemicals burned into her hands. The cracks from the day before, not yet healed, were torn open again, blood seeping out and mixing with the dirty water on the floor. She did not stop because she had no time to stop. She wrapped another layer of cloth around her hands and kept scrubbing, kept wiping, kept moving like a machine without an off switch. By 7:30 in the morning, she was done. Her back felt as if it would snap. Her knees throbbed. Her hands bled. She pulled off the torn gloves and looked down at her swollen red fingers, nails cut down to the flesh because there was no time to care for them. She stuffed the uniform into her bag and changed into another set of clothes, just as old and worn, but at least free of chemical stench. She took a gulp of cold water from the staff restroom sink. That was her breakfast. Then she stepped back outside and walked on toward her second job. The sun was beginning to rise, but for Elena, a new day was only a continuation of the old night. Without boundaries, without rest, only forward motion until her body could no longer move. And in her mind, the image of Mia wheezing on that thin mattress replayed again and again, reminding her that she was not allowed to collapse, not allowed to stop, not allowed to die. The Golden Dragon restaurant sat at the very end of a narrow alley in Chinatown, and Elena arrived at 8:15, 15 minutes early as she did every day, entering through the back door, where the smell of old grease and spoiled food mingled with the hot steam rolling out from the kitchen. Her job was dishwashing from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. 5 straight hours standing at a scalding sink with her hands submerged in soap and grease, scrubbing every plate, every pot, every pan blackened and burned from years of use. Her back still ached from the morning job, but she was not allowed to complain and not allowed to slow down. The restaurant manager was a middle-aged man named Marcus, 45 years old, thick-bellied, his eyes always resting on her in a way that made her feel sick. He liked to stand behind her while she washed dishes, so close she could feel his hot breath against the back of her neck, and today was no different. Elena was scrubbing a stack of plates when Marcus came up behind her, pressed in close, his hand landing on her shoulder, squeezing lightly before sliding down to her waist. Her body went rigid, her fingers clenched around the dish rag as nausea and fury rose in her throat. She wanted to turn around and slap him, wanted to scream for him not to touch her, but she did nothing. She thought of Mia, thought of the $80,000 for surgery, thought of how losing this job would cost her $150 a week. She bit down hard, swallowed the rage burning in her chest, and kept scrubbing as if nothing had happened. Marcus snorted with a crooked laugh, said she was the most obedient employee he had ever had, then walked away. Elena did not turn to look at him. She only scrubbed harder, so hard her hands began to shake, so hard the cracks in her skin split open again, and blood seeped into the soapy water. 5 hours passed like 5 years. When the clock struck 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Elena untied her apron and took the envelope of cash from Marcus, forcing herself not to flinch when his fingers deliberately brushed hers. She tucked the money into the inside pocket of her jacket and stepped outside, drawing in a deep breath of cold air, as if trying to wash the filth from her body. But there was no time to think. By 3 o'clock she had to be at the delivery hub. Elena jogged to the pickup point, where she was handed an old bicycle and an oversized insulated backpack that swallowed her thin frame. The front tire was half flat, the brakes screeched. The seat was torn open, exposing the foam inside, but it was the only transportation she had. Sleet began falling around 4 in the afternoon, pellets of snow mixed with ice slashing at her face like needles. Elena pedaled through crowded streets, weaving between cars, her hands stiff with cold, her vision blurred by rain. She delivered order after order, running up stairwells when elevators were too slow, forcing smiles to beg for tips, even as her lips turned pale and her body shook uncontrollably. The 7th order of the day was a luxury apartment in Midtown. She was cycling through an intersection when the front wheel slid on a thin sheet of ice and the bike lost balance. Elena was thrown onto the street. The delivery bag burst open and containers spilled across the sidewalk, sauce splattering her coat. Rice and meat scattered across filthy snow. She lay there for 1 second, then another, blood seeping through her pants from a scraped knee. Her palms torn raw from breaking the fall. Pedestrians stepped around her as if she were trash in the road. No one stopped and no one asked if she was all right. She slowly pushed herself upright and stared at the ruined food containers, thinking of the money that would be docked from her pay, thinking of the complaint that would be filed, thinking of how she was about to lose yet another job. She began to gather them up with trembling hands, picking up each box and trying to salvage what could be saved even though she knew it was useless. And then the tears came, silent and wordless, slipping down her pale face to mingle with the sleet. She was not crying from pain. She was crying from exhaustion. Exhaustion that reached all the way into her bones. Exhaustion so deep she barely had the strength to breathe. Exhaustion that made her wonder how much longer this body could keep going before it finally collapsed and could not stand back up again. At 7:45 in the evening, Elena stood in the staff restroom of the Midnight Ember bar, staring at herself in a cracked mirror, her face paler than usual, her lips tinged blue, her eyes sunken with dark circles that looked like bruises, her knee still bleeding faintly from the fall earlier that afternoon, as she wrapped it quickly with toilet paper and pulled her pants back up to hide it. No one needed to know, and no one cared. She changed into the bar uniform, a tight black dress and a low-cut white blouse, the kind the manager required because customers liked to look. She hated the outfit, hated the way it clung to her thin body, hated the way men watched her when she wore it. But Midnight Ember paid more than other bars, and Saturday night tips could equal an entire week's wages at the restaurant. She had no right to hate, only the right to endure. Elena stepped out and began the final shift of her day, running from 8 in the evening until 2 in the morning. The bar was louder than usual, cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air, heavy blues music humming from old speakers. She moved between tables, taking orders, carrying drinks, clearing glasses, smiling at customers, even though there was nothing left inside her to smile with. And in the darkest corner of the bar, as every night, Dominic Cross sat there. Elena recognized him the moment she walked in. He always sat in the same place, always dressed in dark clothes, always with a glass of whiskey in front of him that he rarely drank. Tonight was no different. He sat motionless, gray eyes fixed on nothing, a faint scar on his cheek catching the light whenever someone passed by. Elena did not know who he was, only that he came every night after midnight, stayed until closing, and had never spoken to anyone except her the night before. The night she told him, he reminded her of her husband before he died. She still did not understand why she had said it. Perhaps because she was too tired, perhaps because he looked so alone she saw herself in him. Around 11 in the evening, the bar began to thin out. Elena cleared a table near Dominic's corner. Half a burger and a few cold fries left on the plate. She glanced around. No one was paying attention, and the manager was busy chatting with a regular at the bar. She turned her back and quickly shoved a few fries into her mouth, chewing fast and swallowing almost without tasting. It was the first food she had eaten all day, if she did not count the gulp of cold water from the toilet sink that morning. She did not know that Dominic was watching her. He had been watching her all night. From the moment she walked in with a slight limp, to the way she forced smiles for customers while her eyes nearly closed from exhaustion. to this moment when she secretly ate someone else's leftovers like a starving wild animal. Dominic said nothing. He only watched her trembling hands as she pushed the food into her mouth, watched the way she swallowed in haste as if afraid of being caught, watched how she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and went on working as though nothing had happened. And something in his chest, something he had believed long dead, began to stir. Not pity. Dominic did not pity anyone. It was recognition. Recognition of someone fighting to survive at any cost, without complaint, without begging, without collapsing, just as he once had many years ago when he was a 12-year-old boy who watched his mother get killed in front of him. He lifted his glass of whiskey for the first time that night and took a sip. The bitter burn slid down his throat, but he felt nothing. He only watched Elena, the thin woman struggling to live through each day, and wondered how much longer that body could hold out before it finally gave way. Tony Marchetti had followed Dominic Cross for 14 years, from the time Dominic was a 22-year-old young man consumed by rage and pain, to now, when he had become the most feared boss in the south side of Chicago. Tony knew everything about Dominic, knew he drank his whiskey neat with no ice, knew he despised dishonesty more than anything else, knew he could kill a man without blinking, yet quietly sent money every month to support orphaned children without ever letting anyone know. But there was one thing Tony could never understand: why a man who had everything looked as if he had nothing left to live for. That afternoon the meeting took place in a sealed room on the top floor of Cross Tower, the headquarters of the Cross Empire. 4 other bosses sat around a black oak table representing 4 different territories of Chicago. The air was heavy, taut like a string about to snap. The issue was the Western Territory, where a new gang was trying to force its way into their pipeline. Marco Benedetti, the boss from the north, slammed his hand on the table, demanding immediate action, insisting they teach them a lesson in blood. The others began arguing, voices overlapping as each tried to assert his power. Only Dominic remained silent, seated at the head of the table, back straight, hands resting before him, the silver lion ring on his finger glinting under the lights. His gray eyes, cold as steel, swept over each man in turn, and though he said nothing, the room slowly fell quiet. When the silence was complete, Dominic finally spoke, his voice low, neither raised nor softened, each word heavy as lead. He said Marco's impatience would get him killed early, said action without planning was suicide, said he would handle the matter his way and needed no advice. Then he stood, ending the meeting without waiting for a response. The 4 bosses looked at one another, none daring to speak. That was Dominic Cross, cold, decisive, dangerous to the point that even seasoned killers did not dare breathe too loudly in his presence. Tony followed Dominic into his private office and closed the door. The room was spacious yet empty, containing only a desk, a leather chair, and a glass wall overlooking the entire city of Chicago. No paintings, no flowers, no decoration that hinted at life. Dominic stood before the glass wall with his back to Tony, silently watching the city stretch out below. Tony was about to say something about the meeting, about plans to deal with the new gang, but he stopped when he saw Dominic reach into a desk drawer and take out a small photograph. Tony knew that photo. He had seen it many times when Dominic thought no one was watching. It was Sophia Cross, Dominic's sister, taken when she was 23 years old. 1 year before she hanged herself in the bathroom of her apartment, Sophia had the same eyes as Dominic, gray like the sky before a storm. But in the photograph, those eyes were smiling. She smiled brightly, unaware that 1 year later, she would choose to leave the world in silence. Without a farewell, without a warning, Dominic stood there staring at the photo, saying nothing, but Tony saw his hand tighten, saw his jaw harden, saw his broad shoulders tremble slightly as if bearing an invisible weight. 2 years had passed, 2 years since Sophia died, and Tony knew Dominic blamed himself every single day, blamed himself for being too consumed by this empire to notice his sister sinking into depression, blamed himself for not being there when she needed him, blamed himself for letting her die alone in that cold bathroom. Dominic Cross could make all of Chicago tremble, but he could not save the person he loved most, and that truth was killing him from the inside. Day by day, night by night, with every glass of whiskey he drank alone in the dark corner of the Midnight Ember Bar, Tony let out a silent sigh. He wanted to say something, wanted to say it was not Dominic's fault, wanted to say Sophia would not want him to live like this, but he said nothing. Because he knew Dominic did not need comfort. He knew his boss was slowly dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. 3 nights after the meeting with the other bosses, Dominic was once again seated in his familiar corner of the Midnight Ember Bar, arriving later than usual, close to 1 o'clock in the morning, after resolving the issue with the Western gang in a way no one needed to know the details of. The bar was still crowded, cigarette smoke still hung thick in the air, the blues music still low and mournful, and Elena was still there. Moving between tables on legs Dominic noticed were still slightly unsteady from her fall the other night. He ordered a glass of whiskey, not because he wanted to drink but because it gave him a reason to sit there. He did not understand why he kept coming back to this place every night, or why his eyes kept unconsciously searching for the slender figure of that woman among the crowd. Perhaps because she reminded him of Sophia, perhaps because she was the only one who looked at him without fear or desire, perhaps because in her tired brown eyes he saw something he had lost long ago, the resilience of someone with nothing left to lose who kept moving forward anyway. That night the bar was busier than usual because a game was on the television. Customers drank heavily and ordered non-stop, and Elena barely had time to breathe. The bar manager was a man named Derek, 38 years old, heavyset, with a scruffy beard and eyes that always stripped female staff bare in his imagination. Dominic had noticed him for some time. He noticed the way he stood too close to Elena, the way he deliberately touched her when there was no need, the way he looked at her whenever she bent down to clear a table. Dominic hated him enough to want to break every finger in his hands, but he did nothing because this was not his territory and she was not his. But tonight things crossed a line. Around 1:30 in the morning, Elena was carrying a tray of drinks past the area near the storage room. When Derek blocked her path he said something. Elena shook her head and tried to move around him. Derek grabbed her arm, yanked her back, and shoved her into a shadowed corner behind the glass cabinet. Elena let out a short cry, the tray nearly slipping from her hands. Her eyes wide with fear, Derek pressed her against the wall, one hand gripping her arm, the other planted on her hip, his mouth whispering something in her ear that Dominic could not hear. But he did not need to. He saw Elena trembling, saw her struggling but not strong enough, saw tears gather in her eyes, saw her biting her lip to keep from crying, saw her enduring it the way she had endured her entire life, and something inside Dominic ignited. He stood up, not in a rush and not with any noise, simply stood, but the movement alone was enough for Derek to feel it. He turned his head, and his eyes met Dominic's. Dominic said nothing. He only looked at him with gray eyes cold as winter, eyes that had seen death without blinking, eyes of a man who could order someone killed without speaking a word. Derek froze. He knew Dominic. Everyone in the Chicago underworld knew Dominic Cross. He did not know why the Mafia boss sat in this shabby bar every night, but he knew enough to understand that if those eyes were fixed on him like that, he had only seconds to live unless he disappeared immediately. Derek released Elena as if he had touched fire, stumbling back, muttering an apology without sound, then turning and leaving so fast it was almost a run. He vanished into the staff room and did not reappear for the rest of the night. Elena stood there with her back against the wall, breathing hard, not understanding what had just happened. She looked toward where Derek had disappeared, then toward the dark corner where Dominic sat. He was seated again, his glass of whiskey in front of him. As if nothing had occurred, he did not look at her. He stared into nothing as he did every night. Elena did not know he had just saved her. She only knew that Derek was suddenly gone and that she had been lucky enough to escape a far worse night. She took a deep breath, steadied her shaking hands, picked up the tray again, and went back to work. Her steps were still unsteady and her eyes were still wet, but she did not stop. She never stopped, and from his dark corner Dominic watched her. Watched the slender woman forcing herself to stand after the shock, and he lifted his glass of whiskey and took a long drink. The liquor burned bitterly, but not as bitter as the helplessness of knowing he could protect her once, but could never protect her forever from this ruthless world. 1 week after the night Derek vanished from the bar, Dominic sat in the back seat of a black Mercedes moving slowly through Midtown, Tony driving, while Dominic stared out the window without truly seeing anything, his mind occupied with an upcoming meeting with a New York partner, a shipment scheduled to cross the border the following week. Numbers and names he knew by heart, until the car stopped at a red light and he glanced outside. Sleet was falling, the kind of icy December sleet Chicago was known for. Cold and soaking, and amid the crowded traffic he saw her. Elena, pedaling her familiar battered bicycle with the delivery backpack strapped to her back, her head lowered to shield her face from the stinging sleet, wearing the thin gray coat Dominic had seen her in for weeks. A coat clearly inadequate for this weather. He watched her weave through traffic, small and alone in the vast city, and his chest tightened with a feeling he could not name. Then it happened. A taxi braked hard right in front of her. She swerved to avoid it. The wheel slid on a thin sheet of ice, and she fell. the bicycle tipping over as Elena was thrown onto the sidewalk, the delivery bag bursting open and food containers rolling across the wet street. Dominic saw her lie there for 1 second, then another before forcing herself up, saw her wince in pain, saw her knee slam into the ground, saw her hands scraped raw as she tried to break the fall. "Stop the car," Dominic said to Tony, his voice sharper than usual. Tony glanced back in surprise but pulled over. Dominic stepped out without an umbrella, unconcerned with the sleet soaking his expensive coat, moving quickly toward her. But by the time he reached the spot, she was already on her feet, hurriedly gathering the food containers and stuffing them back into the bag despite the dirt, trying to salvage whatever she could, sleet clinging to her hair, her shoulders, her pale face. She did not look up. She did not see him. And before Dominic could get any closer, she was done, righted the bicycle and pedaled away, riding fast as if she were fleeing, as if stopping for even a second was a luxury she could not afford. Dominic stood there on the wet sidewalk, watching her small figure disappear into the sleet, until Tony came up beside him and asked if he was all right. Dominic did not answer. He simply returned to the car, sat back down, and ordered Tony to drive on. But throughout the afternoon meeting, his mind was not present. It was back on that wet street where a woman fell and got back up and kept going without complaint and without pause. That night Dominic arrived at the Midnight Ember earlier than usual. Elena was working, still limping slightly yet never stopping as she moved between tables. She did not know he had seen her fall that afternoon, did not know he had stood in the sleet watching her go. To her he was still only the regular in the dark corner, the man with the scar and the sad eyes she had spoken to once by accident. Around 2 a.m, Dominic stood to leave. He placed 5 $100 bills on the table, 10 times the usual tip, and walked toward the door without looking back. He had taken only a few steps when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Wait." Elena caught up, breathing hard, a stack of money in her hand. She stopped in front of him and looked straight into his eyes, without fear and without submission, only the hard steadiness of someone who had endured too much to bow her head. "You left the wrong amount," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is $500. I do not know who you are or what you want, but I do not take charity." Dominic looked at her, at the brown eyes burning with self-respect, at the cracked hands holding the money out to him, at the slender woman trembling from cold yet standing straight. He could have said it was not charity. He could have said she deserved far more. He could have said he had seen her fall that afternoon and wanted to help. But he said none of it. He simply studied her for a long moment, then nodded and took the money back. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice low and slow. "I am sorry." Elena was slightly taken aback that he did not argue or explain. She stood there for a second, unsure what else to say, then nodded and returned to the bar. Dominic watched her go, and for the first time in many years a faint smile crossed his lips. Not a smile of pity or mockery, but one of respect. Respect for someone who could be hungry, could be worn and breaking down from exhaustion, yet still refused to bow her head for what she believed was charity. "She is stronger than I thought," Dominic murmured to himself as he got back into the car. Tony did not ask anything. He had followed Dominic long enough to know when silence was best. And on the drive home, Dominic did not think about business, the empire, or the problems waiting for him. He thought only of Elena, of her eyes as she returned the money, of the way she said, "I do not take charity," and of how long it had been since anyone had made him feel this way. 1 week after the night Elena returned the money, she brought Mia's drawing with her to the bar. She had not planned to, but that morning, as she was getting ready for work, Mia woke earlier than usual, wrapped her small arms around Elena's legs and said, "Mommy, I drew you a picture. Take it with you so I can stay with you all day." And when Elena looked down into her daughter's wide eyes, at the tiny hand holding up the wrinkled sheet of paper, she could not say no. She slipped the drawing into the inside pocket of her jacket, kissed Mia's forehead, and promised to keep it with her all day. And she did, through 4 jobs, through hours of relentless labor. The drawing stayed in her pocket close to her heart, a reminder of who she was living for. That night at the Midnight Ember, the bar was quieter than usual because heavy snow fell outside. Elena took advantage of the lull, sat on a stool near the bar counter, and took the drawing out to look at it. She wanted to see her daughter's crooked lines, to feel Mia's presence even through a fragile piece of paper. The picture was drawn in colored crayons, clumsy strokes of a 4-year-old child yet full of feeling. 3 figures stood side by side. A woman with long brown hair Elena recognized as herself, a tiny girl with big round eyes who was Mia, and a man with wings standing above them, the one Mia called Daddy in heaven. Beside him was another angel, without a face, only a silhouette and large wings spread wide to protect mother and child. Beneath the picture, Mia had written in uneven, newly learned letters, misspelled but clear to Elena, "I want the angel to protect Mommy so Mommy will not be tired anymore." Elena stared at the words, her eyes burning. She wiped at them quickly, unwilling to let anyone see her weakness. Just then a customer called for a drink from across the bar. She hurried to her feet and stuffed the drawing back into her pocket. But she was too rushed and the paper did not go all the way in, slipping free as she moved and drifting down to the floor without her noticing. Dominic saw it. He sat in his usual dark corner with a glass of whiskey before him as every night, and he saw the paper fall from Elena. He waited, thinking she would return to pick it up, but she was busy serving customers and did not realize she had lost anything. He stood, walked over, bent down, and picked up the paper, and he saw the drawing. He saw the 3 small figures in crayon. He saw the angel spreading its wings. He read the crooked line at the bottom again and again, and something in his chest tightened until it hurt. "I want the angel to protect Mommy so Mommy will not be tired anymore." Dominic stood there with the drawing in his hand for a long moment, thinking of Sophia, thinking of the drawings his sister used to send him when they were children, thinking of a child somewhere at home waiting alone for her mother to return each night. Then Elena came back and saw him holding the drawing, her eyes widening first in surprise then in panic as she hurried over, her voice trembling slightly as she said, "I am sorry, it must have fallen from my pocket. I will take it back." Dominic handed her the drawing without a word. But he did not return to his seat. He stood there looking at her and for the first time asked a question that had nothing to do with the bar or drinks. "How old is your daughter?" Elena was startled. She was not used to anyone asking about Mia, not used to anyone caring about her life, beyond whether she showed up to work on time. 4 years old, she answered after a brief pause. Dominic nodded, looking down at the drawing in her hands. "She draws beautifully and she wants an angel to protect her mother." Elena smiled, a tired and sad smile. "Because she sees how exhausted I am. She thinks if there is an angel I will not have to work so much anymore." Dominic was silent for a moment. Then he asked again, his voice softer than usual, stripped of its habitual coldness. "Why are you so exhausted?" "Just work." Elena looked at him, into the gray eyes watching her not with pity but with genuine curiosity. And she did not know why she spoke. Perhaps because it had been too long since anyone asked. Perhaps because he was the only one who looked at her like a human being instead of a machine. Perhaps because she was too tired to keep everything locked inside. "My daughter has a congenital heart condition," she said, her voice steady and flat as if she were talking about the weather. "She needs surgery, $80,000. Insurance does not cover it. I work 4 jobs every day, and it is still not enough. I do not know what else to do." She stopped and drew a deep breath as if setting down an unbearable weight. It was the first time she had told anyone, the first time she admitted to a stranger that she was running out of strength, that she was sinking, that she did not know when or how she would be able to save her daughter. Dominic said nothing. He simply stood there looking at her, and in those steel gray eyes Elena saw something she had not expected, understanding, pain, as if he too had lost someone and knew what that helplessness felt like. Then he nodded once, did not tell her everything would be fine, did not offer the hollow comfort she had heard too many times. He only said, "You are stronger than you think." Then he returned to his dark corner, sat down, and lifted his glass of whiskey. Elena stood there for a moment clutching the drawing, not knowing why she felt a little lighter after finally speaking the truth she had buried for so long. 3 nights after Elena told Dominic about Mia's heart condition, Victor Salazar walked into the Midnight Ember bar, the kind of man you knew at a glance was not to be crossed. 45 years old, solidly built, his face pitted with acne scars, his eyes dull and cloudy like those of a dead fish, dressed in a black leather jacket, with a thick gold chain around his neck, flanked by 2 hulking associates who stood close behind him. He was a loan shark on the south side, preying on the desperate who had nowhere else to turn, squeezing them until there was nothing left to squeeze. Elena was carrying drinks to a table near the entrance when she saw him. She froze, the tray nearly slipping from her hands, her face draining of color as if she had seen a ghost. She knew him all too well. 3 years earlier her husband had borrowed $20,000 from him to pay rent and buy medicine for Mia. When the child was first diagnosed with her heart condition, her husband had promised to repay it when he got his paycheck, but he was killed in a robbery before he could return a single dollar. Elena thought the debt had been buried with her husband, but she was wrong. Victor never forgot. Victor walked up to her, his smile sharp as a razor. "Long time no see, little sister," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Thought you could disappear." Elena swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady though her hands were shaking. I did not disappear. I just do not have the money. My husband is dead. You know that. Victor sneered. Your husband is dead, that is his problem. A debt is still a debt. 20,000 plus 3 years of interest makes 45,000 now. You have 1 month. Elena felt the room spin. 45,000. She worked 4 jobs a day and still could not afford Mia's surgery. How could she ever find 45,000 to pay a man like this? She stammered. I do not have it. I really do not have it. Please give me more time. Victor let out a harsh laugh. You have been late on the interest payments for 2 months. My patience is gone. I want it all now. Victor tilted his head, his gaze sliding to Elena's jacket pocket, where her old wallet bulged slightly. He snatched it before she could react, opened it, rifled through it. Inside were only a few loose bills and a photograph. Mia's photograph. Victor looked at it, at the chubby face of a 4-year-old with big round eyes, and he smiled. A smile that made Elena feel sick. Cute kid, he said slowly, his finger stroking the photo as if it were an object. 4 years old already? Right about the age when children start to feel fear. Elena lunged forward and tore the photo back, her eyes burning red, her voice breaking. Do not touch my child. Please do not touch my child. I will pay. I swear I will pay. Just do not touch my child. Victor shoved the wallet back into her hands, his cold smile never fading. 1 month, he said. If you do not have the money, I will find another way to collect. And you know exactly what I mean by another way. Then he turned and walked out, his 2 men following, leaving Elena standing there, shaking like a leaf in a storm. She clutched the wallet to her chest, where Mia's photo lay, and fought to hold back the tears threatening to spill. In the dark corner of the bar, Dominic had heard everything. He sat motionless from beginning to end, a glass of whiskey in his hand. But his gray eyes tracked Victor Salazar's every move. He saw the way the man threatened Elena, saw the way he looked at the child's photograph, saw Elena trembling as she begged, and a cold fury began to coil in Dominic's chest. He knew men like Victor. He had killed many of them, vultures feeding on those already exhausted. Predators who hunted the weakest. He despised them. And he would not let Elena become the next victim. After Victor left, Dominic waited 10 minutes before standing. He did not look at Elena as he passed her, did not say a word, only walked out and got into the car. Tony was waiting in the driver's seat as always. Investigate a man named Victor Salazar, Dominic said, his voice icy. Loan shark on the south side. I want everything on him by tomorrow. Tony glanced at the rearview mirror, saw his boss's eyes, and knew someone was about to face very serious trouble. He did not ask why. He simply nodded, started the engine, and drove into the Chicago night. 1 week after the night Victor Salazar appeared at the bar, Elena lived in fear. Every night on her way to work she kept glancing over her shoulder. Every unfamiliar sound made her flinch. Every time she saw someone in a black leather jacket she felt the urge to run. She could not sleep and could not eat, her mind spinning endlessly over how to find $45,000 in a single month, an impossible number she knew she could never reach. She thought about selling blood, selling her hair, selling anything that could be sold. She even thought about selling her body, though. The thought made her nauseous. But for Mia she was willing to do anything. Then one morning, while Elena was cleaning restrooms in an office building, her phone vibrated, an unknown number. She answered with trembling hands, thinking Victor was calling to threaten her. But it was not him. The voice on the other end belonged to a man she did not know, telling her that her debt to Victor Salazar had been paid in full by someone who wished to remain anonymous, and that she no longer needed to worry about it. Elena stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. She asked again and again who paid it, why they paid it, whether this was some kind of scam, but the man only said it was the payer's wish to stay unnamed, and offered no further explanation before hanging up. Elena sank down onto the bathroom floor she had been scrubbing, the phone still in her hand, staring blankly into space. She did not understand. She could not understand who would pay $45,000 for a stranger like her, or why anyone would do such a thing, but she was too exhausted to think any further. She only cried, crying from relief, crying from gratitude, crying because for the first time in 3 years she felt as though someone was standing beside her, even though she did not know who that person was. The news that followed shocked her even more. Carmen, her closest coworker at the Midnight Ember, told her that Victor Salazar had vanished from Chicago. No one knew where he went. His loan office was shut down. His 2 enforcers were gone as well. Some said he had been forced out of the city by a more powerful force. Others said he was dead, No one knew for sure, and no one dared to ask. That same week Derek, the manager who used to harass Elena and the other female staff, was fired. The official reason was a violation of company policy, but Carmen heard that the owner received a call from someone very powerful, and the next day Derek was dismissed without explanation. He disappeared from Chicago altogether. Rumored to have moved to a city on the West Coast because he was afraid of something he would not speak of. Elena listened to these stories in stunned disbelief. She did not understand what was happening, or why everyone who threatened her suddenly vanished, as if swept away by an invisible hand. She told herself it must be luck, a rare stroke of luck life had finally granted her after so many years of hardship, but Carmen did not think so. One night as they were cleaning up after closing, Carmen looked at Elena with a serious expression and said softly that someone was protecting her, that she did not know who it was, but none of this was coincidence. Victor Salazar, Derek, the vanished debt, someone powerful was watching over her. Elena shook her head and said Carmen was imagining things, said no one would care about a penniless waitress like her. Yet as she spoke, her eyes drifted unconsciously toward the familiar dark corner of the bar, the corner where the scarred man usually sat every night. He was not there that evening, and Elena did not understand why she noticed that at all. 2 weeks after the strange upheavals, Elena took Mia to the hospital for her routine checkup, the monthly appointment to monitor her daughter's heart, and every time Elena went, she prayed the doctor would say everything was still stable, that she still had time. But this time the doctor looked at her with concern and said Mia's condition was worsening, and the surgery could not be delayed more than 6 months. Elena thanked him, took Mia's hand, and walked out of the exam room with a tight smile on her lips, unwilling to let her child see her fear. After leaving the hospital, she took Mia to a small diner nearby, the cheapest breakfast place in the area she knew. She ordered a small plate of pancakes and a glass of milk for Mia, and only a cup of water for herself. Mia happily scribbled on a paper napkin with the colored pencils she always carried when the door opened. Elena looked up and her heart skipped a beat. Dominic Cross walked in wearing a long black coat, his hair slightly damp from the melting snow outside. He paused when he saw her, gray eyes flashing with brief surprise before softening. He nodded to her and turned toward the counter to order. But Mia had already seen him, and Mia was a child who did not fear strangers. "Hey, mister," she called out brightly, waving her hand. "Who are you, and why do you have a scar on your face?" Elena rushed to stop her, her face flushing with embarrassment as she whispered that she should not ask such things and apologized, saying the child was small and did not know better. But Dominic did not seem offended. He looked at the 4-year-old staring up at him with wide, curious eyes, and something in his chest softened. He walked over to their table and crouched down to Mia's eye level. "My name is Dominic," he said, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard it. "And this scar is because once I tried to protect someone I loved and I failed." Mia tilted her head, frowning as if thinking very seriously. "What does failed mean?" Elena was about to explain, but Dominic answered, "It means I tried my best and still could not save them." Mia was quiet for a moment, and then said something that froze both Elena and Dominic in place. "But you did not fail," she said, her voice clear and certain, as if stating the most obvious truth in the world, "because you are still here." Dominic looked at the child and found he could not speak. He had heard many words of comfort in his life from Tony, from the people who worked for him, from those who wanted his favor, but no one had ever said anything like what this 4-year-old had just said. "You are still here," as if his continued existence was enough, as if surviving after all that loss was not failure but victory. He swallowed hard, steadied himself, and nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You are very smart." Mia beamed, showing her uneven baby teeth. "Mommy says I am smart too. Can you eat with me and Mommy? Mommy only drinks water because she says she is not hungry. But I know she is hungry because her tummy growls all the time." Elena wanted the floor to swallow her, her face burning red as she scolded Mia softly not to say such things. But Dominic had already pulled out a chair and sat down as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He called the server and ordered 2 more plates of pancakes, a plate of fried eggs, 2 glasses of orange juice, and a serving of sausage for Mia. Elena tried to protest, but he looked at her in a way that did not allow refusal. "This is not charity," he said quietly, only for her to hear. "This is me wanting to have breakfast with you both. Will you give me that chance?" Elena looked at him, into gray eyes that held no pity but respect, and something else she did not dare name. She did not know who he was beyond being a regular at the bar, did not know what he did, where he lived, or why he was here this morning. But she was too tired to ask, and Mia was looking at her with hope. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Throughout breakfast, Mia chattered endlessly, telling him about the pictures she drew, about Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor who gave her candy, about her teddy bear named Butter she hugged every night, about how she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up so she could cure her mommy. Dominic listened to every word without interrupting or growing bored, listening as if the stories of a 4-year-old were the most important things in the world. And Elena watched him, watched the way he looked at her daughter, the way a small smile touched his lips when Mia said something funny, and something in Elena's heart, something that had been frozen for a long time, began to melt even though she did not want to admit it. After that breakfast, something between Elena and Dominic changed, not in any dramatic or obvious way, only in small details that only the two of them seemed to notice. Dominic still came to the midnight ember every night, and still sat in his familiar dark corner, but now he no longer stared into nothing. He watched Elena, and Elena, instead of only nodding in greeting and walking away as before, would stop by his table for a few minutes. Whenever the bar grew quiet, they talked. At first only polite exchanges about the weather, the bar, whether Mia was feeling well. But gradually the conversations grew deeper and more honest, as if they were slowly removing layers of armor both had worn for far too long. One night around 2 in the morning when the bar was close to closing, Elena sat down across from Dominic, her eyes resting on his glass of whiskey. She did not know why she felt the need to tell him, perhaps because he was the only person who listened without judging, perhaps because she was too exhausted to keep carrying everything alone. She began to talk about her husband, about how they met as poor students, about their simple wedding with only the two of them at City Hall, about the nights they lay wrapped around each other in a cramped, rented room dreaming about the future. Then she told him about the night he died, the night she received the call from the police at 3 in the morning, the night she ran to the hospital only to see him lying there cold and still, with a bullet in his chest from a robber. He tried to stop on his way home after a night shift. She told him about the months that followed when she wanted to die with him, about the night she stood on a bridge staring down at the black water below, thinking that one step more would reunite her with him. But then she thought of Mia, of her 1-year-old daughter sleeping at home, a child who would grow up without both parents if she jumped, and she stepped back. She stepped back for Mia, not because she wanted to live. Dominic listened without interrupting and without offering empty comfort. He simply listened, and when Elena finished he was silent for a long time. Then he told her about Sophia, about his sister 8 years younger than him, the girl he promised to protect when their mother died, about how Sophia grew up with the brightest smile he had ever seen, went to college, had a boyfriend, had a future that looked full of light, but he was too busy, too consumed by work, too convinced she would be fine because she always looked fine. He did not see the signs, did not notice how she smiled less, did not see the cuts on her wrists hidden beneath long sleeves, until one day he received a call from the police, just like Elena had, at 3 in the morning, telling him his sister had hanged herself in the bathroom of her apartment. He never got to say goodbye, never got to ask if she was all right, never got to tell her he loved her, and now 2 years later he still woke every night haunted by questions of what if he had paid more attention, what if he had been there more, what if he had not been so busy with meaningless things. Elena looked at Dominic, at the gray eyes now faintly wet despite his effort to hold it in, and she saw herself there. She saw the pain she carried, the guilt she lived with every day, the loneliness of someone who had lost a part of their soul. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "It was not your fault," she said softly. "You cannot save everyone." Dominic looked at the small, cracked hand resting on his and did not pull away. "Neither could you," he said. "You did everything you could." They sat there in the quiet bar, two strangers sharing wounds they had never shown anyone. Elena did not know Dominic was a mafia boss, did not know he could order a man killed without blinking. She only knew he was a lonely, broken man trying to keep living without knowing what he was living for, just like her. That night Elena came home close to 3 in the morning as she did every day. She opened the door to the dark basement, slipped off her shoes, and was about to step quietly toward where Mia slept when she heard it, the sound of breathing, but not normal breathing. It was a harsh wheezing sound, labored and frantic, as if someone were trying to draw air through a clogged straw. Elena ran to Mia, flipped on the light, and her heart dropped into an abyss. Mia was curled on the thin mattress, her face pale with a bluish tinge, her lips purple, her chest heaving violently as if fighting for every breath, her eyes wide with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy," Mia whispered, her voice so weak Elena had to lean close to hear it. "I cannot breathe. I am scared." Elena did not remember how she reacted. She only remembered grabbing Mia, wrapping her in a blanket, and running outside barefoot. Snow was falling, biting cold slicing into her skin, but she felt nothing. She only felt her daughter's small body in her arms, felt the uneven rise and fall of her chest, felt the faint breath against her neck. She ran across snow-covered sidewalks, ran through empty streets at 3 a.m, ran as if the world were collapsing behind her. The hospital was a 20-minute walk from her home, but that night she reached it in 10. She did not know how she did it. She only knew that when she burst through the emergency room doors holding her gasping child and screamed, "Please save my child, please save my child." Her knees were bleeding from a fall along the way, and her feet were numb with cold beyond feeling. Doctors and nurses rushed forward. They took Mia from her arms, placed her on a gurney, and rushed her into the emergency room. Elena tried to follow but was stopped, a nurse telling her she had to wait outside while the doctors worked. She stood there in the brightly lit hospital corridor in a thin nightdress soaked with melting snow, her hair wild, her face streaked with tears, staring at the emergency room doors, as if they were the gates of hell swallowing her daughter whole. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Elena sat on a cold plastic bench in the hallway, trembling uncontrollably. Not knowing whether it was from the cold or the fear, she prayed even though she had not prayed since her husband died. She prayed to God, to Buddha, to anyone who might be listening, begging them to save her child, to let her live, promising she would trade anything in return. Just as dawn began to break, a doctor stepped out, a middle-aged man with graying hair and eyes heavy with exhaustion after a long night shift. He looked at Elena, and she knew from that look alone that the news was bad. "Your daughter's condition is critical," he said, his voice low and careful as if weighing every word. "Her heart valve is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The 6-month timeline we gave you has collapsed completely after this attack. We have stabilized her for now, but if she does not have surgery within 2 weeks, her heart will not hold. Do you understand what I am saying?" Elena understood. She understood all too well. 2 weeks. Her daughter had only 2 weeks. "How much will the surgery cost?" she asked, her voice hoarse. $80,000, the doctor said. "This is a complex open-heart surgery requiring a highly specialized team and equipment. I know that is a large amount, but we can refer you to some charitable organizations or—" Elena did not hear anything after the words $80,000. She had known that number for a long time, lived with it like a ghost haunting her every day, but hearing it again like this still felt like a knife driven straight through her heart. 80,000. She worked 4 jobs every day and earned only about $3,000 a month, most of it consumed by rent, food, Mia's medication, and the monthly care fees for her mother at the nursing home. She had no savings, no assets, no one to borrow from. Insurance would not cover it because Mia's heart condition was congenital and Elena could not afford a premium plan. She had nothing. She raised her hands to cover her face, and for the first time in 3 years since the night she stood on the bridge ready to jump, Elena collapsed. She cried, at first without sound, only tears slipping through her fingers. Then the sobs broke free, raw and broken, the cry of a mother watching her child slip away with no power to stop it. She sank onto the cold hospital floor, hugged her knees, and wept as if the world were shattering around her. And it was her world, the world where Mia was the center of everything, was breaking into a million pieces, and she had no idea how to put them back together. 3 days after the night, Mia was admitted to the hospital. Elena knocked on every door she could think of. She went to the bank and was turned away because she had no collateral and her credit history was too poor. She went to the charities the hospital recommended and was told their funds were exhausted and the waiting list was hundreds of names long. She called distant relatives whose numbers she still remembered, and they either did not answer or said they had no money themselves. She even knelt and begged the owner of the restaurant where she washed dishes. The man looked at her with indifference and said he was not a charitable bank. Every door slamming shut felt like another knife, cutting deeper into the last scraps of hope she had left. Mia remained in the hospital, her skin pale as paper, breathing with the help of machines, sleeping more than she was awake. Every time Elena visited her, the little girl tried to smile and whispered, "Mommy, I am fine, do not cry." And Elena had to bite her lip until it bled so she would not break down in front of her child. On the 4th night, after exhausting every option, Elena stood in front of a nightclub on the west side, the kind everyone knew about but never spoke of, where desperate girls could make money by selling the only thing they had left. Elena stood there in the -15-degree cold, staring up at the flickering red neon sign. She thought of $80,000. She thought of Mia gasping for breath in the hospital. She thought that if she walked inside, if she endured whatever would happen, Perhaps she could earn enough money in a few months. But Mia did not have a few months. Mia had only 2 weeks. Now only 11 days remained. And even if she sold her body, she could not make $80,000 in 11 days. She knew that. She knew stepping inside would not save Mia. But she did not know what else to do. She had nothing left to do. She was empty. Elena stood there staring at the club door, and her legs would not move. Not because she was afraid. She had not known fear for a long time. But because she knew that no matter what she did, no matter what she sacrificed, she still would not save her daughter. She would lose Mia, as she had lost her husband, as she had lost everything. Her knees gave out. She sank down onto the snow-covered sidewalk, her back against the icy brick wall, and looked up at the Chicago night sky with no stars. Her tears had dried up days ago. She had nothing left to cry. She just sat there in the cutting cold, shivering, hollow, waiting for something she knew would never come. She did not know how long she sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time no longer had meaning. Then she heard a car stop, a door open, footsteps crunching on snow coming closer. She did not look up and did not care who it was. Perhaps the police had come to move her along, perhaps a drunk planning something worse. She did not care anymore. Then she heard that voice, low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Elena. She looked up and saw Dominic standing in front of her, wearing a long black coat dusted with snow, his gray eyes fixed on her with something she had never seen before. Not pity and not curiosity, but pain, as if seeing her sitting here on the frozen sidewalk outside a notorious nightclub was tearing him apart from the inside. Dominic did not ask what she was doing here. He did not need to. He knew how desperate she was, knew she had tried everything, knew she was standing on the edge of complete collapse. He bent down, took off his coat, and draped it over her shoulders. Then he sat down beside her right there on the snow-covered pavement, saying nothing at all. They sat there together in silence in the bitter Chicago night, and Elena, for the first time in days, felt a small measure of warmth, if only from the coat around her shoulders and the presence of the man sitting beside her. Dominic did not ask Elena whether she wanted to go with him. He simply helped her to her feet, guided her into the car, and told Tony to drive to the penthouse. Elena was too exhausted to protest, too hollow to think. She sat in the back seat wrapped in his coat, staring out the window without seeing anything, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, without strength to move or even to feel. The car stopped in front of a high-rise building in the Gold Coast, the wealthiest area of Chicago. Dominic took her up a private elevator to the top floor, and the doors opened to his penthouse. Elena stepped inside and felt as if she had entered another world. The apartment was vast, perhaps 20 times the size of the basement she lived in, with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city of Chicago, glittering with nightlights. The interior was minimalist, yet unmistakably expensive. All black and gray, leather and metal. Not a single painting, not a single flower, no trace of life or warmth. Cold, that was the only word Elena could think of. Rich but cold like an elegant tomb. Dominic led her to sit on a black leather sofa, poured her a glass of water, then sat across from her. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her with unreadable gray eyes. Then he spoke and asked if she knew who he was. Elena looked up at him, confused by the question. "You are Dominic," she said, her voice rough from days without sleep, the regular at the bar. Dominic slowly shook his head and said that was not all, that she needed to know the truth before he said what he was about to say. He paused and drew a deep breath as if bracing himself. He told her his full name was Dominic Cross, that he controlled the Cross Empire, one of the largest mafia organizations in Chicago, that he ran most of the underground operations on the South Side, from gambling to smuggling to lending, that he was what people called a mafia boss. Elena froze. She stared at him, waiting for him to say it was a joke, but his gray eyes were deadly serious, and suddenly everything fell into place. Victor Salazar's disappearance, the paid debt, Derek being fired and vanishing from Chicago, the way people at the bar looked at Dominic with quiet fear she had once mistaken for mere coldness. The silver lion ring, the scar on his face, the danger she had always felt around him but never named. Elena sprang to her feet, her heart pounding wildly, survival instinct flaring despite her exhaustion. She looked around for an exit, stared at Dominic as if seeing him for the first time. This was not the lonely man in the dark corner of a bar. This was a mafia boss, a killer, a shadow monster she had heard whispered about but never imagined she would meet. "I have to go," she said, her voice trembling. "I should not be here. Please let me leave." Dominic did not stand and did not stop her. He only sat there looking at her with a sadness she had not expected. "You can leave any time," he said quietly. "I will not keep you. But before you go, listen to one thing." Elena stopped with her hand already on the doorknob. She did not open it. She did not know why she stopped. Perhaps because of his voice. Perhaps because part of her still remembered the man who listened while she cried over Sophia. The man who ate breakfast with her daughter. The man who wrapped his coat around her on a frozen sidewalk. "I will pay for Mia's surgery," Dominic said. "All $80,000. The best hospital, the best doctors, no conditions, no repayment. You owe me nothing, and you do not have to do anything for me." Elena turned back, unable to believe what she had heard. She searched his face for signs of deceit, of a trap she was certain had to exist. No one gave away $80,000, especially not a mafia boss. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment the cold armor around him seemed to fall away. She did not see the terrifying crime lord people feared. She saw a tired, lonely, broken man, grasping for something to hold on to. "Because I could not save my sister," he said, his voice low and aching. "But I can save your daughter, and because for the first time in many years, when I am with you, I feel like I want to keep living." Elena stood there with her hand still on the door, not knowing what to do. She was afraid of him, afraid of his world, yet she remembered the way he looked at Mia, the way he listened without judgment, the way he sat beside her on the frozen pavement asking for nothing, and she remembered that her daughter was lying in a hospital bed with only 11 days left to live. Dominic stood up and moved closer to Elena, but kept enough distance so she would not feel threatened. He looked at her, and in those cold gray eyes Elena saw something she had not expected. Sincerity, vulnerability, as if he were standing bare before her with no armor left to shield him. "When Sophia died," Dominic said, his voice low and slow as though telling a story he had buried for far too long, "I swore to myself I would never again let someone die because I was not attentive enough, not present enough, not willing to act. But for the past 2 years I have not found anyone to save. I only sat in that dark corner, drinking whiskey, waiting for something I did not even know how to name. Then you appeared." He paused and looked at Elena as if she were the only thing that mattered in that cold room. "You said I looked like your husband before he died. You said I was waiting for something that would never come. And you were right. I was waiting to die. I was living without knowing what I was living for, until I met you, until I saw you fighting every single day to survive, to raise your child, to stay standing while the entire world pressed down on your shoulders. You made me want to live again, Elena. For the first time in 2 years, I wake up every morning with a reason to get out of bed." Elena listened, and every word pierced her heart like needles. She wanted to believe him. A part of her, the part that had died when her husband died, trembled at what he was saying. But another part, the part that had learned never to trust after years of being crushed by life, was screaming that this was a trap, that there was no such thing as a free gift, that a mafia boss never gave away $80,000 without wanting something in return. "I cannot," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I cannot owe a mafia boss. I do not know what you want from me, but whatever it is, I cannot give it to you. I am just a penniless waitress. I have nothing. I want nothing from you," Dominic replied. "I only want Mia to live, and I want you to know that not everyone wants to take advantage of you. Some people simply want to help." But Elena had already opened the door. She stepped outside without looking back and without another word. She was afraid that if she stayed one more second she would weaken. She would accept, and she would be indebted to a man she did not know she could trust. Dominic did not follow her. He stood at the doorway watching her small figure disappear into the elevator, and he knew he could not force her. The choice had to be hers no matter what it would be. 3 days passed, 3 days that felt like 3 years. Elena returned to the hospital every day, sat by Mia's bed, held her hand, sang lullabies she had sung since Mia was a baby. Mia grew weaker, sleeping more and waking less, and when she was awake, the light in her big round eyes was fading. The doctor said her condition was worsening and that without surgery in the coming week they could not be sure they could save her. Elena heard those words and felt herself sinking to the bottom of the ocean. She had tried everything, knocked on every door, knelt and begged, and no one helped. No one cared. Only one person had offered help, and she had turned him away out of fear. On the 3rd night, as Elena sat alone in the dark basement staring at the empty mattress where Mia usually slept, she realized a painful truth. She was afraid of Dominic because he was a mafia boss, but she was more afraid of losing Mia. She was afraid of debt, but she was more afraid of burying her daughter. She was afraid of trusting a stranger, but she was more afraid of the regret that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Mia had only 8 days left, and Elena had no other choice. The next morning, Elena stood outside the building in the Gold Coast. Lifting her eyes to the highest floor where Dominic's penthouse was located, she had been standing there for nearly 30 minutes trying to gather the courage to go inside, her pride screaming at her to turn away, to not bow her head before a mafia boss. But the image of Mia gasping for breath in a hospital bed outweighed everything else. She drew a deep breath, stepped into the building, and told the receptionist she wanted to see Dominic Cross. She did not know if he was home, or if he would even want to see her after the way she had walked away 3 days earlier. Yet only minutes later, the receptionist nodded and escorted her to a private elevator. The penthouse doors opened, and Dominic was standing there as if he had known she would come. He was not wearing a suit, like the nights she saw him at the bar, only a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked more tired, as though he too had not slept much. Elena stepped inside and stopped in the middle of the living room. Not sitting down even when Dominic gestured for her to do so, she needed to say what she had come to say while standing, while she still felt she was not too small in front of him. "I accept your help," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "But with one condition, I will pay you back. I do not know how long it will take, maybe 10 years, maybe 20, but I will repay every dollar. Through honest work, I can do anything: cleaning, cooking, administrative work, anything that does not break the law, but I will not owe anyone without repaying them." Dominic looked at her, and a faint smile crossed his lips. The first she had seen since breakfast with Mia. It was not mocking or dismissive, but a smile of respect, of someone seeing what he had long known confirmed once again. "You truly are unlike anyone I have ever met," he said. "Very well, I agree to your condition, but now is not the time to talk about repayment. Now is the time to save Mia." He took out his phone, made a brief call, spoke a few words Elena could not hear, then ended it. "It is done," he said. "The surgery will take place the day after tomorrow at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, one of the finest cardiac centers in the country. The surgeon will be Dr. Richard Harmon, a leading specialist in pediatric heart surgery. Mia will be transferred to a private suite this afternoon. All costs have been covered." Elena stood there, unable to believe what she was hearing. One call, just one call, and everything she had struggled with for 3 years was resolved in seconds. She wanted to cry, to laugh, to fall to her knees in gratitude. But her legs would not move. She only looked at Dominic, at the man she had fled from in fear 3 days earlier, and she did not know what to say. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "I do not know what to say except thank you." "You do not need to say anything," Dominic replied. "You just need to be with Mia. She needs you." Elena nodded as tears began to fall despite her effort to hold them back. She turned to leave for the hospital immediately, but then she stopped and looked back at Dominic. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, because she still did not understand. "You could help anyone. Why me?" Dominic studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you looked at me and did not see a mafia boss. You saw a tired man who looked like your husband before he died, and that was the truest thing anyone has said to me in many years." The day of the surgery arrived faster than Elena had expected. Mia was transferred to Northwestern Memorial Hospital the afternoon before, and placed in a private luxury room with a wide window overlooking Lake Michigan. The little girl stared around in wonder at the spacious, spotless room with its large television and bed soft as clouds. "Mommy, is this a princess room?" she asked, her big round eyes lighting up for the first time in days. Elena only nodded, holding back tears, pulling her daughter into her arms and promising that after she woke up she would be healthy like a real princess. The next morning at 6 o'clock, the nurses came to prepare Mia for surgery. Elena had been awake all night, sitting beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand, watching her sleep and praying without pause. Dominic arrived at 5:30, carrying a small bouquet of sunflowers, because he remembered Mia saying at breakfast that she liked sunflowers. He placed the flowers on the bedside table and stood quietly in the corner of the room, saying nothing, simply being there as a silent presence. Elena did not realize she needed until she saw him. When the nurses began to wheel Mia's bed out, the little girl suddenly grabbed Elena's hand. "Wait for me a moment," Mia said, her voice weak but determined. "I have something to give, Uncle Dominic." Elena looked at her in surprise as Dominic stepped closer. Mia reached under her pillow and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper and a small note scribbled in uneven letters. "I drew this for you," Mia said, handing the folded paper to Dominic. "And I wrote this too. You read it after I fall asleep. Do not read it in front of me because I am shy." Dominic took the drawing and the note, his hand trembling slightly for reasons he did not understand. He nodded and promised he would read them later. Mia smiled, a fragile but warm smile, waved goodbye, and let the nurses take her away. Elena followed, kissed her daughter's forehead one last time before the operating room doors closed, and stood there watching Mia disappear behind the frosted glass as if her heart were being torn apart piece by piece. Dominic stood beside her and without speaking placed a hand on her shoulder in quiet reassurance. Then he remembered the paper and the note in his hand. He opened the folded drawing first, and his heart seemed to stop. It was a crayon drawing with the clumsy, loving lines of a 4-year-old child. But this time there were 4 figures instead of 3. A woman with long brown hair who was Elena, a tiny little girl who was Mia, a man with a scar on his face who was Dominic, and an angel with wings flying above them, the one Mia called Daddy in heaven. Beneath the drawing Mia had written in uneven letters, "My family." Dominic stared at the picture, at the image of himself standing beside Elena and Mia, and something inside his chest began to melt. Then he unfolded the small note, and what he read made his hands shake so badly he nearly dropped the paper. Uncle Dominic, Mia wrote in crooked, newly learned letters, misspelled but readable. "Thank you for making Mommy smile again. Mommy does not cry anymore since you came. If I fall asleep and cannot wake up, please promise me you will not let Mommy be sad all alone. I love you, Mia." Dominic stood there in the quiet hospital corridor, and for the first time in many years, his steel gray eyes filled with tears. He thought of Sophia, of the goodbye letter she never left, of the words he never got to hear from her, and now a 4-year-old child he had known only weeks was giving him the words he did not know he needed so desperately. Elena saw Dominic standing frozen with the note in his hand and his shoulders trembling. She stepped closer, read the note, and she cried too. She had not known Mia wrote those words, had not known how much her 4-year-old daughter worried about her or how deeply she had come to love this once stranger. Dominic turned to Elena, his eyes red but his voice steady. "She will wake up," he said. "I promise. I will not let her fall asleep forever, and I will not let you be sad alone." Then they waited, 6 hours that felt like 6 years. Elena sat on the bench outside the operating room, twisting her hands endlessly, her eyes fixed on the closed doors. Dominic sat beside her without speaking but held her hand, and she did not pull away. She needed that warmth, needed to know she was not alone. Every time a nurse walked past, Elena jumped up with frantic questions only to sink back down when told the surgery was still in progress. Time dragged like torture, every second heavy as stone. By the 4th hour, Elena began to shake uncontrollably. Dominic removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders as he had that night on the frozen sidewalk, and she leaned into him exhausted and terrified yet still praying. The 5th hour passed, then the 6th, and finally the operating room doors opened. Dr. Harmon stepped out, still in surgical scrubs, his face tired but smiling. Elena leapt to her feet, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. "The surgery was a success," the doctor said. "We were able to repair the heart valve. She will need time to recover, but she will be fine. She will live a normal life." Elena heard those words and the world seemed to stop. She did not know how she reacted, only that her knees buckled and Dominic caught her before she fell. She cried as she had never allowed herself to cry before, crying from relief, from gratitude, from joy, from every emotion she had held back for so many years. She collapsed against Dominic's shoulder, and he held her, holding her tightly as if she might shatter if he let go. "She will be all right," he whispered into her hair. "Mia will be all right. You do not have to be afraid anymore." And Elena sobbed against him in the bright hospital corridor, for the first time in 4 years allowing herself to believe that maybe life would not take everything she loved. 2 weeks after the surgery, Mia was discharged from the hospital. The little girl walked out on her own 2 feet, holding her mother's hand, her smile bright as a sunflower. Dr. Harmon said the operation had gone even better than expected. The new heart valve was functioning perfectly, and with proper care, Mia would live a normal life like any other child. Elena heard those words and had to bite her lip to keep from crying in front of her daughter. Normal. Her child would live a normal life, the thing she had prayed for over 4 long years, the thing she once believed would never happen. But the changes did not stop there. When Elena prepared to take Mia back to the dark, damp basement, Dominic handed her a key. "What is this?" she asked, staring at it in disbelief. "Your new home," Dominic said, "a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, part of a housing assistance program for single mothers run by a charitable foundation. The rent is subsidized, and you will only pay about $300 a month." Elena wanted to refuse because she already owed him too much. But then she looked at Mia. at her daughter who had just survived heart surgery and needed a clean, warm place to recover, and she could not say no. She accepted the key and whispered, "Thank you," with a trembling voice, while Dominic only nodded as if it were nothing. The new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a quiet building with 2 small bedrooms filled with light, windows overlooking a park where children played every afternoon, a clean kitchen and a bathroom with hot water. Elena stood in the living room looking around and could not believe this was her home. No moldy smell, no rats, no peeling walls or leaking ceiling. Mia ran around the apartment squealing with joy, saying, "Mommy, I have my own room. Mommy, look at the trees outside. Mommy, it is so beautiful here." And Elena sat down on the clean floor, pulled her daughter into her arms, and cried with happiness. A week after moving in, Dominic called Elena and told her there was an administrative manager position available at Hope Foundation, a nonprofit organization supporting single mothers and struggling families. The job was from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, with health insurance, paid leave, and a salary comfortable enough to live on. If she wanted, she could come in for an interview. Elena went to the interview and was hired the same day. The director, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, said Elena had exactly what they were looking for: resilience, empathy, and real-life experience with what single mothers faced. Elena did not know the foundation was funded by an anonymous benefactor with Dominic behind it, and she did not need to know. She only knew that for the first time in 4 years, she had a proper job with fixed hours, kind colleagues, and the feeling that she was doing something meaningful instead of merely surviving each day. And for the first time in 4 years, Elena slept through the night, 7 hours every night on a soft bed in a quiet room with Mia sleeping peacefully next door. She woke in the mornings without exhaustion, looked in the mirror, and saw the dark circles under her eyes fading, her skin less pallid, and light returning to her eyes that she thought she had lost forever. Dominic visited them often, not every day because he did not want Elena to feel intruded upon, but often enough that Mia squealed with delight whenever he appeared at the door. Uncle Dominic. She would run to hug his legs, pull him inside, and make him sit on the floor to draw with her. And Dominic, the Mafia boss feared across Chicago, would sit on the floor with a 4-year-old child holding crayons and drawing clumsy pictures that Mia praised as beautiful, even though they looked like a chaotic mess of colors. Some evenings Dominic stayed for dinner. Elena cooked simple meals: pasta, chicken soup, fried rice, and Dominic sat in the small kitchen watching her cook, sometimes helping chop vegetables or wash dishes. They did not talk much, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was the silence of 2 people who had grown used to each other's presence, and no longer needed words to fill the space. Mia usually sat between them at the table, chatting endlessly about what she learned at her new preschool, about her teacher Miss Amy, about her new best friend Lucy, about wanting to become a doctor when she grew up to heal children like herself. Dominic listened to every word, asked questions that made Mia eager to talk more, and Elena watched them. Watched the man who once sat alone in the dark corner of a bar now smiling with her daughter, and her heart began to beat to a different rhythm, one she had long forgotten, a rhythm of hope, of trust, and perhaps of something more she had not yet dared to name. 5 months had passed since the day Mia left the hospital, and spring had arrived in Chicago. The snow had melted, bare branches were budding with new life, and the park outside Elena's apartment window was glowing with soft pink cherry blossoms. Mia was now 5 years old, healthy, running and laughing like any other child. The surgical scar on her chest had faded, and her small heart now beat steadily, strongly, full of life. Elena stood in the kitchen looking out the window as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and she realized she was smiling, not the forced smile she had worn for 4 long years, but a real one, the smile of someone who had found joy again. She was no longer the exhausted waitress working 4 jobs a day, no longer the desperate mother standing outside a nightclub on a freezing winter night. She was Elena, administrative manager at Hope Foundation, Mia's mother, and a woman learning how to love again after years of merely surviving. That evening Dominic came as he often did, but something was different. He wore a white shirt instead of his usual black, and there was a light in his eyes Elena had never seen before. Mia was already asleep in her room after a long day playing in the park, and the 2 of them sat by the window watching cherry blossom petals drift softly through the night air. "Elena," Dominic said, his voice low and warm, no longer cold like the night they first met at Midnight Ember. "Do you remember the first night you spoke to me?" Elena nodded. "You said I looked as tired as your husband before he died. You said I was waiting for something that would never come." Dominic reached into his pocket and took out a small black velvet box. "You were right. I was waiting to die. But then you appeared, And you gave me a reason to live, you and Mia. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant silver ring with a warm brown stone set at its center. The stone was the exact color of Elena's eyes, the deep brown of earth, of resilience, of a woman who had survived storms and still stood tall. I do not want to fix you, Dominic said, his voice trembling slightly for the first time since Elena had known him. Because you are not broken. You are the strongest person I have ever met. I only want to build with you. A home, a future, a life with all its hard days and its beautiful ones, together. Elena looked at the ring, at the brown stone catching the light, then into Dominic's gray eyes. Eyes once cold as steel, now warm, hopeful, waiting, and she realized she was no longer afraid. Not afraid to trust, not afraid to love, not afraid to open her heart to the man who had saved her daughter, saved her, and shown her that not everyone comes to take, some come only to give. Yes, she said, her voice shaking but certain. Yes, I do. Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they embraced, a small, sleepy voice sounded behind them. Mommy, Uncle Dominic, what are you doing? Mia stood in the bedroom doorway, clutching her teddy bear Butter, her eyes heavy with sleep. Elena and Dominic turned, and Dominic knelt to Mia's level. I just asked your mommy if she wants to be a family with me, he said, and she said yes. Mia woke fully, her big eyes shining like stars. So we are a real family now. A real family like in my drawing. A real family, Elena said, tears streaming down her smiling face. Mia squealed with joy and ran to hug them both, and the three of them stood there holding one another by the moonlit window. A family built from broken pieces, from pain and loss, yet finally finding one another. Elena rested her head on Dominic's shoulder and whispered, You did not just give me a home. You gave me something I no longer dared to hope for, a reason to believe life can still be good. Dominic kissed her forehead and answered softly, And you gave me a place to belong, a reason to stay. Outside the window, cherry blossoms continued to fall in the night breeze, and Chicago in spring had never been more beautiful. Their story, once scattered in fragments, had finally become a home. And this story offers us a profound lesson about life, that even when you are in the darkest place, even when you are exhausted and ready to give up, keep moving forward, because you never know who is waiting for you around the next corner, because sometimes the one who saves you is a stranger sitting quietly in a dark corner you never noticed, and sometimes opening your heart to accept help is not weakness but courage. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video with those you love. We would love to know how this story made you feel. Have you ever met someone who unexpectedly changed your life? Have you ever been lost and then found hope again? Share your thoughts in the comments. We are listening. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, peace, and happiness every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.